The other day, one of my students asked me, and it was a fair question, why don't we call you sensei? And within Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I actually think sensei is a pretty cool term. You know, the anime geek in me likes that term, and the martial arts geek in me likes that term. But to my recollection, I've never heard anybody within Brazilian Jiu Jitsu called a sensei. So what are the acceptable terms? What do I prefer to be called? Well, first of all, within Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there are a couple of things we could be called, or a couple of titles that black belts and whatnot have. One of them is master. I'm not a huge fan of that term myself. I think the whole master thing has different connotations, particularly here in America. So I'm not entirely comfortable being called that. There's maestra, which is the Brazilian Portuguese version of it, or the Portuguese version of the word. I'm a little bit more comfortable with that because it doesn't have the same kind of connotations. Sometimes I hear that being used, but I prefer not to be called that myself. There's professor, and there's actually not just any black belt can be called a professor, apparently. This has been a little bit of a controversy within the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community. I believe it's like a second degree black belt can be called a professor, which I would qualify for, being a long-term third degree black belt at this point. And there's even a denotation between like the belts that we have. So like you have a plain black belt with a red bar on it, which is just your, I don't want to say standard run-of-the-mill black belt, but your black belt right there. But lately they've denoted to black belt with a white bar, which denotes just a fighter, but somehow not a professor. You get that as a competitor. And if you watch competitions, a lot of times you'll see people wear that belt, even if they have like different belts to wear outside of the competition. In fact, because of the regulations they have of the quality of the belt that you have to wear, it can't be too frayed or whatnot. Most of us that compete will actually have a competition belt in addition to the belt that we wear on a regular basis. I couldn't wear my regular basis belt. It's too beat up to wear in competition. So it's that white bar one. And then there's your professor rank belt, which is the red bar with two white stripes at the end of it. Okay. And it denotes that you're a professor. And some people actually have a ceremony where you graduate from red bar to red bar with professor stripes on that. And then you get your additional stripes, or degrees we call them in Jiu-Jitsu, based on the length of time you've had. So professor is an acceptable thing to call a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt or your instructor. Although nobody actually calls me that too. Another one that I actually prefer, if you have to call me anything other than my name, I always tell people like, hey, call me Gumby, or hey you if you want to, just get my attention in a respectful way, is coach. Here I think coach is, it has a good connotation to me. Like, you know, I think it's very good to explain what I do for my students. It's a little bit more personable than say instructor, which if I'm addressing somebody in the third person, it's like, oh, so-and-so is my instructor. That makes sense, but you never call instructor so-and-so, or you never like, you know, it's a little bit of a cold term to call somebody your instructor to your face. Like, hey, instructor Gumby, come over here for a second. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So Gumby or Coach Gumby is what I would prefer. And I always get all of this, you know, one of the things that attracted me to Jiu-Jitsu was there's certainly a tradition within Jiu-Jitsu, how it came from Japan, how it came from Brazil, how it came up to the United States and the rest of the world, and how it spread out there. So I'm not pretending there's not a tradition, but I follow the martial arts traditions the way that I came up, the way that Ralph Gracie brought me up. I'm a Ralph Gracie black belt. I would sometimes refer to Ralph Gracie as being my maestre. When somebody asks me, it's like, oh, like, who's your professor? It's like, oh, it's Ralph Gracie. Or sometimes I'll say Maestro Ralph Gracie. But I've never called them that to his face. I've never said, like, hey, Maestro over there. Like, he's always just been Ralph to me. So I never wanted to inject traditions, you know, even though they might be perfectly legitimate martial arts traditions. You know, I keep the traditions the same way that I was brought up. Like, you know, I'm not putting in any different traditions than the way that Ralph brought me up. And in a lot of ways, he was super informal when he opened up that academy, which is one of the things that attracted me to it. Like, there were no titles, there were no bowing. You know, I often tell my students everything is based on common sense and common courtesy. I think we had a lot of that back in the day. Like, it really was my upbringing and the way I brought back. So as such, beyond the fact that we did hard training, we had very few traditions at the original Ralph Gracie Academy. Like, back when it was one academy, Mountain View, was him there every single day. Like, nobody addressed him as anything other than Ralph. So I'm not going to take another title if my own maestro, if you will, if my own instructor, if my own upbringing, I'm not going to take another title if he wasn't going to take a title. Like, that would feel wrong to me. That's not to say we didn't have any traditions. Like I said, we had very few traditions. One of the traditions that we had as we were coming up is the gauntlet, which is really controversial these days, of course. If you don't know what the gauntlet is, it's the process of when you get promoted to the next belt level, you're going to have to go ahead and run through a line of your peers, your students, your teammates, or whatever, and you'd run down and they basically whip you with the belt. And again, that's really controversial right now, and quite frankly, it can get out of hand even back in those days. But I'll tell you, back in those days, and even today, if anybody participates in that gauntlet, it's always been voluntary. Like, nobody's ever, like back in my day at least, felt pressured, I have to go through this one right there. It was kind of a badge of honor, and like, it might have hurt. You had some guys in that line that would be like, and going crazy on that one right there. But, it was just like, compared to the training that we had before, compared to the daily grind to get that belt, you didn't really feel it. You felt it, but like, it was small in comparison to everything it took out to get there. So like, for those that participated on that was a badge of honor. Like, we wanted to go through that. But I understand also that not everybody wants to go through that. Nobody has the same feelings. Like, I think that should be entirely voluntary. Even with my own academy, that's a voluntary process if you wanted to do that. Some people I never impose that. Some people heard about it's like, I really want to have that done to me. Like, I really want that process. And I'm like, if that's what floats your boat, go ahead. Okay, so that was the tradition right there. The other tradition that we had that's actually not used as much right now and not all that well known was the concept of black belt on the mat. Remember, I'm old, so like when I started training back in '96, there was nothing but like white and blue belts, a handful of blue belts on the mat. And then there was Ralph, who was obviously a number of levels above us as a black belt right there. And black belts were rare at that point. At least here in the United States. So black belt on the mat is oftentimes when you start off the class, people would be warming up. Maybe they would even go into a guard passing drill. The warm-ups would be led usually by one of the senior students, one of the blue belts. At that time, it was either Bobby Southworth or Dave Camarillo. Usually Bobby Southworth actually handled the warm-ups. And Halford would get in there. He was very rarely the first person in the academy, I'll just put it that way. But when Ralph stepped on the mat, you had to stop what you were doing and everybody would get up. Somebody would say black belt on the mat and then everybody would get up and then go greet Ralph. Like, that we'd have the line and then we go back to doing whatever we were doing right there. So that was the black belt on the mat tradition. And Ralph made a bit of a game of it too. So like after a while, he would stand on the side of the mat and like, side of the mat, you were safe. But the second he set his foot on the mat, it was black belt on the mat. You had to get up and greet him. And if you didn't greet him, there'd be extra warm-ups everywhere you do push-ups or burpees or something like that. So he made a game of standing on the side of the mat. And, we'd all have to pay attention. It's like, is he on the mat yet? Is he on the mat yet? Is he on the mat yet? And the second he set his foot on there, we had to go up and greet him as a team right there. Even if one person wasn't paying attention or didn't greet him, that meant everybody had to do push-ups. We had that kind of a bonding right there. So, after the group misses that once, and it has happened before, everybody's paying attention to that. And like I said, he played a game on it. He was sitting there like, is my foot there? Is it not there? Keep going, not there. He had some fun with that. Even when I got my black belt, at this point I've been a black belt since 2006. So we're talking 14 years ago. And even back then, the black belts were much rarer. There was only a handful of them at the academy at that point, and I would say a handful of them or less black belts than there are right now, obviously. The first day I got it, because I had to do that black belt on the mat for years, it was that was a really cool thing. It's like I was on the sideline and I can go ahead and step on and everybody had to greet me. And that was a really cool thing. And I did that the day after I got my black belt, or the day, it was the day after, because it was the day that I was training again. I had my black belt on. And trust me, after I got promoted to the black belt, I couldn't wait to go back into the academy and show off that shiny black belt. So I did the black belt on the mat once for myself. And then I never did it again after that one right there. It's like, oh, that was a cool feeling. I really needed to have that feeling. It really kind of felt like I was coming full circle, that black belt on the mat. But that's all I kind of needed to do. And nowadays, I think it's less common, not because like we're more humble or anything like that. It's just not practical to do it anymore. Like there's so many black belts out there right now. If you had to do black belt on the mat every time another black belt got on the mat, you'd interrupt the class multiple times unless everybody got on at the same time. But it would just take too much time, in my opinion. So like you rarely see that anymore. Even in Half, like it's like whatever right there. Although like in the times that I'm training, if I see Half get on the mat, it feels good to me. It's my tradition right there. It's like I'll stop whatever I'm doing. I get up. It's black belt on the mat to me. I'll greet Half. He's the only one that I would do that for. But those are the only two traditions we had. And like I said, I don't want to interject any of the traditions that we didn't have or didn't grow up with. Even if I recognize they're legit martial arts traditions, I don't do them because I didn't come up that way. I don't want to add new things into this. I'm not saying you can't add new things into this. It's my personal comfort level on this. But, jiu-jitsu to me was always about results and practicality. And there's a certain amount of traditions, the belts are a tradition. What belt, what rankings we are. It's in some ways it's arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. That would be the wrong word for it. It's subjective. What I feel somebody's rank should be when I promote somebody in that way. And there's a traditional sense on that. So I'm not against tradition. I'm just against adding traditions that I didn't come up with. I'm not going to make anybody go through something that I didn't go through, including that type of stuff. And then again, if I never called Half anything other than his name, if I call him up I'll call him Half. I'm not going to have anybody call me anything other than Gumby. But if you really, really, really want to describe it to a third person, if you're saying hey, this is Gumby, he's either my instructor, I think is a good thing, or my coach. And there's a difference between the two of those also, between an instructor and a coach. I often tell people within the academy, I'll play both roles. An instructor is somebody that goes ahead and is here's the techniques. You come in, it's a relatively new one. I'm not going to say it's impersonal, but you need to do step 1, step 2, step 3. An instructor will guide you through that, how to do the technique. Even to the point how to do the technique in certain circumstances. This is what you're supposed to do. It's more of a lecture type format. So that's how I would think of as instructor. Whereas a coach, after you've gotten those technique down, after you've gotten the how, after you're at a point where you need a little bit more personalization in your training right there. It's okay, this technique works correctly for you. In these circumstances, based on your game, based on your knowledge, based on your tendencies, I have to have a little bit more of an intimate knowledge about how you play to be called a coach in this sense. Even the psychological factor, I know how you're going ahead and what your tendencies are, what your mood is, how to motivate you and stuff like that. That's the role of a coach as opposed to an instructor. So I play both roles at the academy. When we're getting to know each other, when you're getting to know the art, I'm much more of an instructor at that point. Then if you come into the comp classes, we're getting for team ready. If I'm trying to get you ready for a competition, you should know that stuff that I taught you as an instructor, but I'm much more coach mode at that point. I'm not telling you how to do stuff at this point. I'm telling you when to do that stuff. I'm giving you that motivation. So either one of those would be correct, but if you see me, hi, it's Gumby.